right, well, good morning, everyone. My name is May Whiting, and I am the Data and Research Director here at Alabama Possible. We're happy to have you today for our Cash for College Advanced FAFSA webinar, specifically for our experienced practitioners. So we're encouraged by your attendance today and hope that you find our conversation around these more complex aspects of the FAFSA to be useful to your work. I want to say a quick thank you to our sponsors who make all of these webinars and trainings completely free to our educators. Without these organizations and companies, this wouldn't be possible. So we do appreciate their support. And also a big thanks to our partners, Alabama Commission on Higher Education, the Alabama Community College System, and the Alabama State Department of Education, along with Get Educated, the Common Black College application. We've been getting a few texts through our help desk about the Common Black College app. So excited to see that students are interested in using that platform. We do have a code in our educator toolkit that allows our Alabama students to utilize that platform for free. So just want to do a quick plug for the Common Black College app. Some housekeeping notes before we get started today. If y'all wouldn't mind keeping your microphones on mute at all times. If you have an AI note-taking feature, please disable that unless you need accommodations. If you do need accommodations, feel free to send us a direct message and we'll make sure not to disable that. This webinar is going to be recorded and it will be posted to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Alabama Possible. And then all of the slides that you're seeing today are going to be posted in our follow-up email, so you will have them available to you shortly after today's webinar. Throughout the webinar, you're more than welcome to ask questions by utilizing the chat feature in Zoom. So we might answer the question in real time, but if we don't, we'll make sure to catch all of the questions at the end during our Q&A session. We will have poll questions throughout, and in particular, our poll questions at the very end of the webinar are important if you are looking to get professional development credit. So like I mentioned, please hang on for that at the end. So as y'all are doing this very important work with your seniors, hosting events, sharing information with your families, feel free to tag us on any of your posts on social media. We just love keeping track of the ideas that y'all have and new strategies you're using. We're going to learn from two of our MVP award winners from last year on what they did both with the class of 2025 as well as this current class of 2026. So we just love staying in the know on what kind of innovative things y'all are using. So feel free to tag us at AL Goes to College. I'm sure as experienced practitioners, most of y'all are familiar with our campaign components, but today we are going to focus on our Cash for College component. Our goal with this initiative is for every graduating senior to complete their FAFSA because it gives them access to federal, state, and institutional aid. And our big goal is for them to complete the FAFSA really as soon as possible. So we highly encourage early completion. So what we're going to do today, if you had a chance to join us for FAFSA 101, we did start going through a lot of the steps of the FAFSA. We are going to review some of those steps, but for everything that is a review, we'll move through that pretty quickly. And then we're going to go into much more depth in certain complex aspects of the FAFSA. So we're going to describe student eligibility. We're going to understand the personal circumstances section of the FAFSA. We're going to determine parental information and how to report it in more complex living situations. We're going to review the contributor section and go into a little more depth there. And then we're going to discuss FAFSA completion strategies and resources you can utilize. So we'll hear again from two of our award-winning high schools towards the end of today. So I'm gonna put a poll question up for you just to see how many of y'all were able to attend the FAFSA 101 webinar. If you weren't able to attend back in September, we do have that webinar recorded on our YouTube channel. Again, today's session will really build off of that. So if you feel like some of the content today was rushed and you want to go back and revisit FAFSA 101, that really is kind of the foundation to what we're doing here today. And then this will be part of our session towards the end of the webinar today. But I also wanted to ask y'all, does your school or district admin provide specific instructions for documenting FAFSA completion and waivers? So we're going to have a little segment about Power School today. And I'm just curious if your administration is giving y'all very specific instructions for how to do this. All right, it looks like around 65% of y'all are receiving instructions, so that's great to hear. We have the opportunity to hear from educators all across the state. And we did a project over the summer just trying to learn more about pretty much every aspect of FAFSA completion, tracking, documenting. And we heard a pretty varied response as it related to this question. So, lots of different ways districts are doing this. And I definitely would encourage you, if you are getting specific guidance from your district, to follow their guidance. And if you're not, to reach out to your leadership and see how they would like you to go about this. But thank you so much for your feedback there. All right, so I want to start off today talking about federal aid eligibility before we even get into our steps for the FAFSA. So here we're talking about students and their eligibility. So to be fully eligible to accept federal aid, students must have a high school diploma or GED certificate, or complete a approved homeschool education, or meet one of the ability to benefit alternatives. In addition to that, they either need to be a US citizen or an eligible non-citizen. So today we're going to go into a little more detail about the eligible non-citizen category, and kind of highlight that. And then we'll also cover that more in our webinar on December 3rd, where we're talking all about financial aid for immigrant families. A student to be eligible also has to have a valid Social Security number, and there are some exceptions. So students from the Republic of the Marshall Islands, the Federated States of Micronesia, and the Republic of Palau, they do not have to have a social. So some more requirements to be eligible: they need to be enrolled or accepted as a regular student in an eligible degree or certificate program. Then while they're in that program, they're going to have to maintain satisfactory academic progress, and that will actually be defined by their particular college. So something like a GPA requirement, getting through a certain number of credits within a certain time frame. All of that will be defined by the college. So we recommend students just have a general understanding of what their college defines as satisfactory academic progress. And then when the student is in their FAFSA, they're going to have to provide consent and approval to have federal tax information transferred directly into the FAFSA. So they just have to have provide consent for this tax information to be looked for. If they don't have any tax information, that's totally fine. They just have to give the consent for it actually to look for that tax information. And then they're going to have to sign certifying statements on the FAFSA. So these are eligibility requirements specifically for the student. So it might be good before a student even creates an account to see if they're eligible for federal aid. And in particular, we're really talking about our immigrant students. So knowing that our undocumented students who do not have a social security number would not need to go through this process of creating an account or starting a FAFSA. So these are our main steps. We really went through steps 1 through 4 during our FAFSA 101 webinar. So we are gonna kind of breeze through those today, but then for a few elements of those steps, we're gonna go into more depth. With creating the FSA IDs and gathering documents, we have two resources related to those steps. So we have a guide showing best practices for creating the accounts. And then we also have a checklist that pretty much shows everything a family would need to complete a FAFSA. Those are all in our toolkit, so I'm dropping that link in the chat right now. After a student has an account, they're going to be able to start their portion. And if they're a dependent student, then they'll need to invite their parent to contribute to their FAFSA. So that's really getting us through steps 1 through 4. Steps 5 through 7, we're probably going to touch on more in future webinars. So we have one that specifically talks about the steps after submission. So things like reviewing the FAFSA submission summary, doing any verification steps if the student is asked to, and then what it looks like to receive and accept financial aid off. So just breezing through this, because I know y'all are experienced and y'all know most of this. So the FSA ID is their account for federal student aid. They'll keep it for as long as they're pursuing post-secondary programs. And hopefully you've noticed this year, if you've already hosted events, that that real-time match through the Social Security Administration is just making this process a lot quicker, where students don't need to wait for their identity to be verified. It's automatic, and then they are able to access the FAFSA immediately. So some issues that we might run into are when they are verifying their email address and when they're verifying their phone number. So with the state cell phone policy, you might be having to kind of maneuver through some logistics with getting that process done. But I hope it's been pretty smooth sailing for most of your family so far. So of course our students need their FSA ID, but then there might also be other people who need an FSA ID as well. So for our independent students, they might have to invite a spouse if they're married and they did not file their taxes together. If that's the case, the student's spouse would also need to create their own account. Most of our high school students, though, are considered dependent students. So they're going to be providing their own information as well as inviting their parents to provide parent information. So in that case, the parent will need to create an FSA ID and they'll report their information. But which parent actually creates their account is going to depend on a few factors. So we're going to talk more about that. We know that with everything FAFSA, there's a lot to get done. So we hate to ask more of y'all, but we do highly encourage utilizing this parent wizard tool that you see linked here prior to even starting the FAFSA, just because it helps the family understand who needs to be involved in the process and it eliminates any wasted time. We've had tons of parents create accounts when they don't actually need one because they're not the parent who needs to contribute. So just using the parent wizard tool in advance to understand who actually needs to add their information to a student's FAFSA. So we have our students creating their account. If they're a dependent, then they're also going to invite their parent. But as the student starts the FAFSA, the first section of the application that they're going to get to is the personal circumstances section. And this is the section that determines if they are a dependent student or an independent student. And so when they're answering the questions in this section, the student should really carefully review the definition of the terms that they're seeing to see if that term actually applies to their situation. So let's go ahead and look at this now to just get an idea. So we see we're in the very first section, and they're being asked if any of these apply to go ahead and check it. So these are essentially running the student through a lot of the dependency questions. So, the student is currently serving on active duty in the U.S. Armed Forces for purposes other than training. The student is a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces. Student has children or other people who live with him and receive more than half of their support from the student. At any time since the student turned 13, they were an orphan, meaning no living biological or adoptive parent. Any time since the student turned 13, they were a ward of the court. At any time since the student turned 13, they were in foster care. Student is or was a legally emancipated minor as determined by a court in their state of residence. The student is or was in a legal guardianship with someone other than their parent or step parent as determined by a court. So each of these options here has the little question mark button. If you need more details or more information about how a term is being defined, you can click that here. But there are a few of these that we wanted to highlight specifically because we hear questions about them or there just might be a lot of confusion around them. So this last one before the none of these apply button, the student is or was in a legal guardianship. So if the student were to check this, that would mean that they are independent for the purposes of FAFSA, meaning they don't have to provide parent information. So if a student checks any single one of these check boxes other than the none of these apply, then they will be independent. So when we're looking at the legal guardianship question, we want to understand exactly what it means. Legal guardianship is a designation by a court that authorizes someone to care for an individual in place or absence of parents. So this legal guardian essentially is qualifying a student as an independent student who doesn't need to provide parent information. Now, legal guardianship is different from legal custody. So, if the court is awarding legal custody, then the student is not necessarily considered independent for the purposes of the FAFSA. They would need to meet one of the many other requirements to be independent. So we just want to make the distinction between guardianship and custody. And if a student is unsure, we definitely want to look at any kind of record or documentation to ascertain which of these terms applies to the student so we're making sure we answer the question correctly. So we went through a lot of the dependency questions on that one screen, but then the FAFSA also presents us with a few more dependency questions. So the student is asked if they were unaccompanied and homeless or self-supporting and at risk of being homeless. So they need to be unaccompanied and then they need to be either one of those two things, homeless or self-supporting and at risk of being homeless. So to define those further, this is a lengthy definition, but when we're talking about just the word homeless, we mean lacking fixed, regular, and adequate housing. So a student may be homeless if they're living in shelters, parks, motels, hotels, public spaces, camping grounds, cars, abandoned buildings, or if the student is even temporarily living with other people because they have nowhere else to go. So this also applies if the student is living in any of these situations and fleeing an abusive family, even if the parent would provide a place to live. So if it's a matter of safety for the student. And then unaccompanied means the student is not living in the physical custody of their parent or guardian. So both of these need to apply to a student for them to be able to check yes to this question here. And so if the student is selecting yes, they're going to be asked if a specific program determined the student to be homeless. So usually we're thinking of the school or district homeless liaison, but it can also be a director of TRIO or Gear Up. It can also be the director of a shelter or some kind of outreach or youth homelessness program. And if there hasn't already been a determination made for the student, a financial aid administrator at a college can actually make this determination for the student. So if the definition applies to the student, we want there to be as few barriers as possible for the student to be able to answer yes to this. So connecting them with someone who can make the designation was hopefully broad as possible to make that happen. So we really wanted to touch on the legal guardianship aspect and then the homelessness aspect because we get a lot of questions about those. But then for our dependent students who need to provide parent information, we also get into situations where the student might have what's called unusual circumstances. And unusual circumstances essentially allow a dependent student to be given a provisional student aid index even without providing their parent information. So there's something going on where the student shouldn't have to provide parent information. And even though they technically are a dependent, they're going to get their SAI without putting their parent info on the FAFSA. The student will have to provide documentation to prove that they can't get parent information, but it's pretty expansive in what it allows as documentation. So things like interviews, records of phone calls, court documents. So these are the things that kind of fall into the category of unusual circumstances. So it's asking if any of these apply. Did they leave home due to an abusive or threatening environment? Were they abandoned or estranged from their parent? Do they have refugee or asylee status and are separated from parents? Are they a victim of human trafficking? Is the student themselves incarcerated or are their parents incarcerated where contact with them would pose a risk? And then are they otherwise unable to contact or locate their parents? So if any of these apply, The student could say, yes, I have unusual circumstances, and then they will have to do all of that follow-up with the college to effectively show the unusual circumstance. So if they do answer yes, they will be provisionally independent until the college follows up with them. And so just to reiterate, a provisionally independent student can in fact submit their FAFSA without parent information. Now, a student who has unusual circumstances is different from a student who just has parents who are completely unwilling to cooperate and give their information on the FAFSA. So if parents are just unwilling to provide their information and the student doesn't have any of those unusual circumstances, then the student can be considered for a limited amount of direct unsubsidized loans only. And then their student aid index actually won't be calculated. So let me show you what that looks like. So we get to a screen that says, hey, you are a dependent student. You do need to provide parent information. But the student's like, hey, my parent's not going to provide the information. They're unwilling. So when we get to this question, are the student's parents refusing to provide their info on the FAFSA? If they are to say yes, then the student will only be eligible for direct unsubsidized loans. So we really do want to avoid answering yes to this question unless it's the student's only option. And we know some parents do create a huge barrier for students. So you might have a situation where a student is selecting yes to this, but ideally, most of our students are selecting no. So we got through personal circumstances, and now we're moving on to our student demographics section. And this is where we have a question about citizenship status. So, most of our students, they're just going to select the first option, US citizen or national. But there's also this category of eligible non-citizen, and then there's also the option for neither. So for option one, if the student is a US citizen or national, they'll just proceed forward. Option two, if the student is an eligible non-citizen, they're going to be asked to provide their alien registration number. Option three, if they're neither a citizen or eligible non-citizen, then they can proceed forward, but there will be limited aid options and they'll need to contact the financial aid office of each college after submitting. So option one are US citizens or persons who are born in the 50 states, District of Columbia, and in most cases Puerto Rico, the US Virgin Islands, Guam, and the Northern Mariana Islands. And then it's also going to include most persons born abroad to parents who are US citizens. Then our US national category includes natives of American Samoa and Swains Island. So these folks will proceed forward with the FAFSA. Then we have option two, so our eligible non-citizens. So this includes a wide variety of people, but it's most commonly going to include our permanent residents who have a green card. It could also include refugees, asylees, or a parolee who have the arrival departure record. And then probably a little less common, people on a T visa. So these are victims of human trafficking. People who have battered immigrant status and are victims of abuse. And then our folks who have citizenship in the Federated States of Micronesia, the Republic of the Marshall Islands, or the Republic of Palau. And then folks with status under the Jay Treaty, so this includes Canadian-born Native Americans. So these folks are eligible non-citizens, meaning they can proceed forward with the FAFSA. They will just be asked to provide their alien registration number. So they'll put it in right here after they make that selection. And then we have option three, where they're not a US citizen, not a US national, and not an eligible non-citizen. This means they are not eligible for federal aid. So this includes actually quite a lot of different kinds of immigration statuses, but most commonly it's going to include folks who have been granted deferred action for childhood arrivals or DACA, F1 or F2 student visas, J1 or J2 exchange visitor visas, G series visa, or no protected status, so our undocumented student. So with option number three, some of these folks can proceed forward. They won't be eligible for federal aid, but they might proceed forward because they're eligible for other aid opportunities. So with our DACA folks in particular, if they have been granted DACA, they're not eligible for federal aid, but they might have a social security number, meaning that they could complete the FAFSA to determine their eligibility for state or institutional aid. With how the DACA policy works, y'all are probably not running into this very much. But in the case that you might have a graduate who's returning for assistance, this could be something y'all come across. But option three, they're not eligible for federal aid. So we move through our demographics section, and now we're in the student financial section. So if the student has filed taxes, they will indicate that in this section. If a student is unsure whether or not they should be filing taxes, they can consult the link on this page. It's IRS Pub 17, and they can see if they have a tax filing requirement. So they'll see if they have met any of the thresholds that apply to them. But they'll answer questions about their tax filing status. And then if they are filing taxes, the direct data exchange will hopefully pull that federal tax info from the IRS into the FAFSA. And that's why it's so important for the student to provide their consent and approval for that system to check that they have any tax records. Contributors will also do this as well, so the student and the contributor. And then any information that's transferred in is not going to be seen on the actual FAFSA. It will all just be kind of held in the back end of the form. And just to reiterate, without consent, the FAFSA won't be able to do this. So the FAFSA will be considered incomplete, and then the student is ineligible for federal aid. The FAFSA uses prior year tax info. So for our 2026-27 FAFSA, we're using those 2024 tax returns that were filed in 2025. And then we always just recommend having a copy of those, either a digital copy or a printed copy, if there are any questions that the family encounters where a copy of it would be helpful. So the student's going to be asked more questions about their taxes and their income, and they'll put their answers in dollar amounts. If they don't have an answer to a question because it doesn't apply to them, then they can put zero. And then we also had CMR has found a really useful page that kind of shows how to how to find answers to tax questions. So I'm going to drop that in the chat right now. Each part of the FAFSA should kind of be instructing folks of where to find the answer. But if it helps a student or a family to have a visual of where to find it on the form, the link I just dropped in the chat does a good job of giving a visual. So then we get to the student assets section. And the students asked about their cash savings, checking, their investments, and any businesses or farms. So, a lot of this isn't going to apply to our students. And actually, for many of our students, if their family as a whole is below a certain threshold, the FAFSA won't even use the responses that a student puts here. So the student should answer all of these questions accurately, but the FAFSA will use both the student information and the parent information together to see if they need to even take this information into account. So now we're getting to the part of the students portion where they invite their contributor. And as we've talked about, there's been a huge improvement to this process where the student just puts their parent email and that invitation gets sent off to the parent. It does not matter that the email that the student lists match whatever email the parent has used to create their own FSA ID. It just needs to go to an email that the parent checks so that they can receive the invitation. Another thing here, we'll just kind of reiterate using the parent wizard, making sure that when the student gets to this invitation process, they are inviting the correct parent. So that's where we would want to use the parent wizard to see who does the FAFSA actually consider to be the parent. So they're only going to need that email address to get the invitation sent, and the invitation will generate a 7-digit code that the contributor will then use to access the application. So it says email or invite sent, and then if they're having trouble receiving the email, the student also has the option to just directly copy the invite link. They can even text that to their parent, and that invite link will pull up the correct page for the parent. So we're going to run through a couple scenarios real quick. All right, so we're going to have to call back to our set of dependency questions, like think about whether or not a student is a dependent, and then if they are a dependent, who is the parent that should be contributing to the FAFSA. So scenario one, Tobin's parents are separated. Tobin's mother contributed majority of financial support. Tobin's father claimed her on his 2024 taxes. Tobin is considered a dependent for the purposes of the FAFSA. So drop in the chat, which parent do y'all think Tobin should invite to contribute to the FAFSA? So Tobin is actually going to report the mother's information because it tells us that the mother provided the majority of Tobin's financial support. So it actually doesn't matter that Tobin's father claimed her on his taxes because tax dependency is not the same as FAFSA dependency. So, what the FAFSA cares about when it looks at divorced or separated parents, it wants to know which parent is contributing the most financial support. So, that's why we're putting mother here for the person to contribute. And then if Tobin's mother ever gets remarried, then Tobin will also have a step parent provide information on the FAFSA. So real quick, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and I'm just gonna pull up the parent wizard so that we can look at that together. All right, so here's our parent wizard. So we don't know their names, but Tobin's mom and Tobin's dad. And here we are putting um, the biological parents. So it's always asking for the biological or adoptive parents here. It asks, are they married? No, they are not. Do they live together? No, they do not. And then which parent has provided more financial support for the student over the past 12 months? So because we were told mom, we're indicating mom. As of right now, mom is not remarried. So only mom is a parent on the student's FAFSA form. Student will only need to invite mom. So that's just another situation where it's just really helpful to run through the parent wizard, make sure we're understanding what the FAFSA means by parent. All right, go back to our slides. We have one more scenario. So Risha hasn't lived with her parents since 2015. She lives with her grandmother, who is her legal guardian, but has not adopted her. So, whose information should Risha report on the FAFSA? Go ahead and drop that in the chat. Because Risha has a legal guardian, she is considered independent for the purposes of the FAFSA. So, she would not have to provide any parent information. All right, so getting to the signature section. So, the student's going to agree to the terms and then if the parents already completed their portion, then they'll be able to sign and submit. But in most cases, the student is starting. So the student will sign and then have to wait for their parent to also contribute. So in this situation, the student signed, they get to this page that says pending submission, check with your contributor, and then you see that the parent section is left. So now we're going to the contributor section. And when that contributor gets invited, they're going to log in with their own FSA ID to complete their section. So they get this email that invites them. They can click accept invitation, and then they'll log in with their own account. And then they're going to use that 7-digit code to accept the invitation from their student. So the parent portion of the FAFSA is largely similar to the students, but there are a few additional questions asked. So we're going to go over those in a little more depth today. So we have federal benefits received, family size, number in college, and then annual child support received. So federal benefits, this question is asking at any time during 2024 or 2025, did the parents or anyone in their family receive benefits from any of the following federal programs? So considering that time frame and then basically anyone in their household. Then they're going to be asked a question about family size. So this page is asking if the family size differs from what is on the 2024 tax return. So the parent has the option to enter the number of children or other dependents who live with the parent and will receive more than half of their support between a time frame. So if for the purposes of federal income taxes, the number of people on that does not reflect the actual number in the house who are being supported financially. This is the family's opportunity to make that note here. And we get to a question about the number in college. So the parents asked how many people in the family will be in college between this time frame, not including the parent. And then we continue on with the contributor financials section. And this, there are a few not rare situations, but just want to bring it up here in case it is something you cross. So, in general, we hope that for most of our families, they're able to utilize the direct data exchange where their tax information is just being pulled directly from the IRS into the FAFSA. There might be some situations where that's not the case. So, for our parents who might live and file taxes in a foreign country, they're obviously not filing US taxes. They do still need to provide consent and approval just to like check the system, see if there's anything there. When the system says no, there aren't any US taxes, they then have this manual process to go through. So they're going to need to convert the amounts on their foreign tax return into US dollars. They're going to use the published exchange rate, and then they're going to manually enter their tax information from their most recent foreign tax return. I will say I've only participated in this one time in my life. I don't see Amara might have done this more than I have. I've gotten questions about it and like kind of guided folks through it, but I have had to reach out to some of our federal student aid contacts to lead us through that. It is a particularly difficult process. So feel free to reach out for assistance with this and we'll get you connected to the right people because we might not be those people. Um, a few other situations where the family might not be able to have just the simple direct data exchange experience. So let's say a parent's marital status changed since they filed their 2024 tax return. This is probably more common. If that's the case, then this is how they're going to report financial information. So, our first scenario, if they got divorced, separated, or were widowed since filing. So if they filed their taxes in 2024 jointly, they're going to need to subtract out their former spouse's tax return information so that they're only reporting their portion of the information that applies to them. And then any item that applies equally to the two people who filed jointly, they'll need to report half of the total for that item. And let me see, I have, it's linked here on the page, but let me see if I have that link. I don't have that link readily available, but it will be linked on the slide. There is a resource showing you how to split all of the income. So again, this would be for someone who filed jointly in 2024, but now they're either divorced, separated, or widowed, and they need to subtract out their spouses or former spouses portion. And kind of the opposite of that, say they filed single in 2024, but they have since married. So they'll just enter their 2024 tax information as it was, but then they'll also invite their current spouse to report their 2024 tax information so that it's now reflecting that they are married. A few other situations where the direct data exchange might not be as seamless. So our parents who are undocumented will have to manually input tax information. Our undocumented parents who don't file taxes will have to select that they did not file taxes. They'll put the reason why, and then they'll be manually entering in their income. For situations like this, even if, the student is a US citizen, it's just their parents who are undocumented, we do strongly recommend that those students have an advocate with them throughout the whole FAFSA process. So even beyond submitting their FAFSA, because when a parent is manually inputting their income, they're likely just going to get a follow-up from the college. So we want families to have an advocate with them as they're potentially being asked more vulnerable questions about income and tax filing and all that. So in the financial section, the parents asked about taxes, income, and other financial information similar to how the student was, and then they're inputting their information mostly as dollar amount. Now, the one part of the parent section that's different from the student on the assets page is that they're also asked about annual child support received. And it's actually asking for child support received for the last complete calendar year. So if you have a family who's completing from now until the end of December, they will be answering this question about the 2024 calendar year. If you have a family that is working on their FAFSA after the new year, so they're starting, say, middle of January, they'll be answering this question about the 2025 calendar year. So just one of those things where the FAFSA is like making you look at this teeny tiny text and making sure you're answering correctly. Um, and then our other asset questions that we've seen on the student page as well. We've linked here just the paper version of the FAFSA because the notes that they have attached to the paper version goes into more detail defining terms for assets. So we've had a few changes to the definitions of these assets in the last year. So this would be a good resource to see how things are being defined. But you should also have some help text on the screen to kind of guide families through that. So then if there is another parent, then the first parent's asked to provide information about their spouse or partner. And that other parent does not need to contribute to the student's FAFSA if the parents filed their taxes jointly. They'll just have their information, including their date of birth, reported, and that's all they'll need to provide. So we get all the way through the parent section. They're also reviewing and they are agreeing to the terms and conditions and signing. And then they have the option, because their students already completed their section, they have the option to submit. So when they submit, you'll see, congratulations, the FAFSA form is complete. The student will then also get an email notifying them that their contributor has submitted it, and they'll get kind of a more detailed confirmation. The student should also then be waiting for another email from Federal Student Aid notifying them of their FAFSA submission summary being available. So they can track that through their account or just waiting for the email confirmation. All right, got through the steps of the FAFSA. And now I want to talk about power schools. I know right now y'all are probably just trying to get students through their portion of the application, but as we get further along in the academic year, we want y'all to feel confident in how you are documenting this graduation requirement. So, we've had a power school coach provide us with this resource that you see linked here. Again, it will be in our follow-up email, but I have this in the chat for y'all. Um, this is some guidance for a few different aspects of student data, but it does include instructions for putting in the FAFSA waiver information. So you have a link in the chat as well as the contact information for one of the Power School coaches. And now I'm going to switch my screen over to a recording of a presentation she gave to us yesterday. So let me pull that up for y'all.
So good morning, everybody. I'm Quandria Robinson, one of the state's Power School coaches, and I'm excited about being here with you all. I want to thank you all for what you do each day for our students across the state. But our topic today is to talk a little bit about the FAFSA, making sure we're getting those waivers, encouraging our students to, or I shouldn't say our students, but our parents to complete that FAFSA each year. So what I have for you now, this is the Power School Alabama Edition website, and you're probably familiar with this website. All right. So what we have here, this is the Power School Alabama Edition website. With this website, May is going to share with you some resources. You're probably already familiar with these resources, but over here on the Power School Alabama Edition website, we have a page that's dedicated to updating student information, student data. And this is the page here, updating student data. On this page, what you will find, I'm going to come down just a little bit. These are the directions on how we enter in the FAFSA waiver for our students. There's also some other information that um, may prescribe to you, and that's the entering of the graduation exit type for our seniors, updating those CCR boxes. Also, there's some information about the graduation pathway. But these are all of the steps here. Not only can we enter this information for our students, just an individual student, but we can also complete these processes in mass. But all of these documents, they're located here on the Power School Alabama Edition website. Okay. So when we talk about those FAFSA waivers, understand we're entering in that information on our students' AL custom page. We're over on that custom page. So you have three options, and something should always be inside of those boxes. So if our students or our parents, if they complete that FAFSA, there will be the option of, no waiver, meaning they completed everything as asked. If there was a district waiver, there's a district waiver option. There's also a parent waiver option if the parent has completed the waiver. So another question that I get with the FAFSA information is, where do we store? Is that little document, it's like a completion form that the students can print off? It's going to be up to you in your district whether you file that away physically. Okay. There's also an option of storing it inside of Power School. It's an attachment option. So it's going to be up to you and your district as to how you want to file those forms away. Most of our districts across the state, they're just physically filing those forms away. Okay. Keep in mind whether the student has no waiver, parent waiver, or the district waiver, that information can be input into Power School individually or in mass. And this is the document here, entering FAFSA waiver for students. That little document is a 3-page document. It will tell you how you can do this either in mass or individually. Okay.
I was wondering if you already touched on it a little bit, but maybe go into depth about why the student's graduation date matters and like how that could impact things for educators. I don't know if you said withdrawal date as well, but graduation date in particular.
Right. Now, with our students, we do have some students that do like a mid-year graduation. They may complete everything, maybe before Christmas, right after Christmas. But a majority of our students, they're going to do a traditional graduation, which may be, a May, early June, right? So one of the documents that I shared here on that Alabama Power School page was the graduation exit type. So with that exit type, you're listing what type of diploma that student earned and then the date. So that date is going to be important. You do want to make sure if you do have those mid-year graduates that their information is uploaded. When I say their information, did they have a waiver? Did they complete the FAFSA? You want to make sure that information is correct. All of it is located there on that AL custom page. For our traditional student graduates, May, early June, you're going to complete that same process and you're going to put that day after the last day as their graduation date. Okay. Same thing for mid year is always the day after the last day. Okay.
Okay.
Day after the last day is that graduation day.
Some folks might not know if they're troubleshooting issues in Power School. They have a particular point of contact with the Power School coaches to reach out to.
Yes. What you can do, I'm going to post, look in the chat box. If you do have any issues with, the uploading process, maybe you need some additional permissions to upload everything in mass when it comes to whether it's graduation exit date or FAFSA information, feel free to reach out to myself. Let me put my email. here in the box. Also, what we do, many of you all probably receive those emails from Stacy Royster each Monday morning. Is that true for some of you all? You get those emails? My contact information and also the information of the other coaches are located there. We do offer throughout the month different virtual professional development classes. And those classes, like I said, they're all virtual. They also last about 1 hour. Sometimes they run a little less than an hour. But what we do, we set the classes based upon what's going on that time of year. So with graduation, making sure we're graduating our seniors correctly, marking their graduation exit type, their FAFSA, we usually start doing those courses around April, entire month of May. How to store grades, we do those every 9 weeks. So it's just based upon what's going on that type of or that time of year. But any questions that you may have, troubleshooting, maybe something is not updating correctly, you can, reach out to me. That's my email.
I'm just gonna kind of reiterate through our slides, our recommendations. So, like Quandria was mentioning, all of this is under AL custom, and the student, 12th grade student should start out with no options selected. So it should start out as null, and then they have the three different options. We recommend, once the student has completed their FAFSA, that F01 is the option entered in, meaning they've done what is required of them. They don't need to utilize a waiver, so that first option selected. And then if they use a waiver, whether it's parent or district, then indicating that here. And then based on what your district instructs you, attaching that, uploading a PDF or keeping a physical copy. We know it differs across district what you're instructed to do there. The important thing is that before the student graduates, one of these is selected. As an organization, we're obviously highly recommending that as many students who can complete a FAFSA as possible do that, and that we are using the waiver kind of as our last resort. We've seen with our high schools that have the highest completion rates, they really aren't promoting the waiver. They're encouraging every single family to complete a FAFSA. Of course, for those students who really do need the waiver for various reasons, of course, not gatekeeping that from them, but our schools that have the most success tend to like leave the waiver conversation for the very end of the academic year. All right, so I kind of already went through that portion, but that link that Quandria provided has instructions for so many different aspects of Power School, so it is extremely useful if y'all want to use that. So now I'm excited to bring on a few of our award winners from last year. So we have two of our MVP high schools with us. We're going to start off with Kim from Saraland High School. So I'm going to turn it over to you now, Kim.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, this is Kim at Saraland High School. I'm the senior counselor, and I work hand in hand with Emily Easterbrook, our career coach, in trying to get as many people to complete the FAFSA as possible. So what I did here is I just did a kind of our timeline, and of course, the last 2 years with the whole FAFSA not ready until after Christmas kind of a thing, it kind of threw everything off. But this is kind of our traditional timeline. So the last 2 years, of course, we didn't get started until like January as far as kind of monitoring the FAFSA completions. But traditionally, what we like to do is we go into the classrooms in August, and when we're doing the senior kind of their first transcript audits, we also have them complete their federal student aid IDs at that time, right in August, right from the get-go. So we're in the classrooms and we're having them do that. Also in August, we have a senior information night where we talk to all the parents and students and we start bringing up the FAFSA and the process. And I put information in the senior portfolio folders about the FAFSA and completing the FSAID and trying to encourage as many parents to get their FSAID ahead of time as well and not wait until October. So one of our big things, and you had just said this, May, is not promoting the waiver. Talking about the FAFSA is on the graduation checklist. And that's how kind of we talk about it. This is something that the state would like you to do to see your options. Even if you're not planning to go to college, you never know what's going to happen down the road. And so this just kind of gives you your full array of options if you get the FAFSA completed. So we don't really talk about the waiver until the end of the school year. There might be a case by case basis if a parent has talked to us individually and said, we're not going to do the FAFSA, that we'll go ahead and start that conversation with them. Even when we bring up the waiver, we kind of talk about how, it has to have the principal's permission, it has to have the superintendent's permission, we have to send it to the state, and so sometimes just going through those steps, they go, oh, I'll just do the FAFSA. So it just kind of depends on the individual situation. But a big part of ours is incentives. You know, we want the students to get the FAFSA done sooner rather than later. And we kind of tie that in with college applications as well, because we're trying to get everybody to, apply to at least one college and also get their FAFSA done. And so our first incentives are in December. So in October, when the FAFSA opens, we have, of course, financial aid night, and we advertise that, and we have parents come in and we help the parent and the student with FAFSA completion. But our big part, especially now, this year, with how easy the FAFSA has become for students, especially, we get the student part finished right in the classroom. And before this year, we did that, up to the part where they had to put in their parent information with all their social and all that information, which was very complicated. But this year, with just putting in an email, wham bam, the students have all completed their FSID by August and then their FAFSA portion by October. And so they just go home and the parents have to just complete their part. So it's been a lot easier this year than even years past. But some of the incentives that we do, we just want to encourage them to complete these things sooner rather than later. Don't wait till the end of the school year. Is our teachers have been very good about providing extra credit in core classes. And so that's a huge incentive. And this year, since we're getting it done so early, the students that get it done by December 5th with a college application and their FAFSA completion will get extra credit this semester in their core classes as well as next semester. And I've also been very happy with working with my college reps and getting different swag, different items that students can pick from. So that's been another part of the incentives as well. So right now, I've just started calling kids in that have completed both parts of what they're supposed to do, getting them to pick an item of their choice, uploading that, their choices, their t-shirts or ball caps or water bottles, uploading pictures of that on social media and just getting that conversation started. So December 5th is kind of my first timeline as far as those incentives. Um, I do have another incentive in January I didn't post, but I'm just going to give them an extra something. I don't know if we're going to buy Chick-fil-A biscuits or something for people that get it done right after Christmas. March will be that final incentive, that we want, to that big push by the end of March for them to have their FAFSA completed. And then in April is kind of where we go, okay, you're 18, you haven't done the FAFSA, what's your plans? Especially if they're going straight to work and we know they already have, work lined up or they're going to the military, we then can say, okay, go ahead and sign this if you're 18. If not, then we talk to the parents about getting that signed at that point. But that's kind of the first time we really bring up the waiver or the opt-out form entirely. And so that's kind of our timeline of the year. And then the next slide, I just put some of the tips, again, explain that the FAFSA is on the graduation checklist, so they kind of think in their head, I've got to do this. Don't bring up the FAFSA opt-out form until April. Get teacher administration, teacher and college rep buy-in for those incentives, regular communication about the FAFSA completion and incentives. So I'm always on the announcements. I'm always in the classroom talking about those things. Even like last week, we had progress reports where they went to homeroom. I put in a note, hey, you've got your college app uploaded, but you don't have your FAFSA uploaded. So I'm always kind of communicating with the students on those things. Getting the college rep assistance with financial aid night, that was huge, and being just available for the FAFSA completion with parents. So even if they couldn't come to FAFSA night, that they could come, individually and do appointments with us and getting that done. And then, of course, keeping documentation of the FAFSA completion and incentives. So, what's my next slide? I think I just said this was our FAFSA financial aid night flyer that we sent out. with a letter saying this is on the graduation checklist, and this is how you're going to get it done. It had our financial aid night, but it also had resources for like Alabama Possible, studentaid.gov, different college financial aid offices that could help. And so we actually snail mail this. So we do some things with email. We do some things with social media, but we also snail mailed this because we want to make sure we're covering all bases. So someone can't say, "Oh, I didn't know about it." We want to do that. So the only final things that I would say is on here, I don't know if Emily's on here that can share our screen here. We do a Schoology class of 2026. Every year we do a Schoology class. And on there, that's how our kids will upload proof of FAFSA completion and college app completion. So with that, um, they will have to upload proof. And I wait until they've gotten that FAFSA summary report because they need to upload proof that it's been done correctly. Sometimes when they finish the FAFSA, it may not have been done correctly, and then they have to correct things. Um, but I don't know if that's going to be able to be shared. But anyway, we have a class of 2026 on FAFSA, and they can upload proof
Hey
of
D,
FAFSA.
I have it. It's on. It should be shared. I shared my screen. It says I'm screen sharing.
Do you have,
Okay.
Emily, do you have
So
a
can it?
dual monitor by chance? Oh, there
I
it
do
goes.
There we
not.
go. There we go. Okay. So
Okay. Okay.
with our class of 2026, we have like all sorts of materials on there, like FAFSA help, different links to FAFSA, different ways to order transcripts, all sorts of different things we put on our class, including scholarships. But this is how we say by Friday, December 5th, if you can get these two things uploaded, then you're going to get the incentives this semester. Okay. And so they just upload it to this, and I can check off that they've done that. And then the other thing, I just do a
And
spreadsheet.
the one thing that she does to make sure that it is the proper thing is that the student's name, FAFSA year, and also the student aid index must show because they
Yeah.
can fill out the wrong FAFSA year and that's not
Hmm.
what they need to complete. So side note. Okay.
Yeah. And so then I know that I do use the portal, to verify FAFSA completion, but it hasn't been 100% for us yet. So I just do a spreadsheet, and that way I can keep track of um, there we go here. It has all our names on it. So it tells you, if they've completed their FAFSA, if I need something better with their proof, their college app's completed, and then if I've already given them incentive or not. So that kind of just helps me kind of as a quick glance know where I'm at with every student whenever they come in to see me. So lots of information. I'm sorry I talk fast, but is there other questions or?
Feel free to add your questions in the chat for our presenters, but thank you so much for your thorough explanation of what y'all are doing. We know it's working because y'all are our award winner, and just like the level of detail that you have on each student and where they are in the process of their college and career planning, I think is just remarkable. So appreciate
Thank
all the energy you're pouring into it because
thank you.
it's working wonders. So y'all can still add questions in the chat. I'm gonna also turn it over to our other presenter now. Let me pull up our slides. We have Lisa from Hewitt-Trussville High School. So all yours, Lisa.
Thank you so much for letting me share a little bit about what we do today. Yeah, Kim and Emily, that was really impressive. My presentation's just not quite so detailed, just kind of sharing a little bit about our school, our community, and things that are starting to change for us and what we did last year in order to achieve FAFSA completion. So yeah, for last year, Hewitt had a little less than 1,600 students in our student body. 402 of them were seniors. 83% reported plans of heading to a 2 or 4 year college or university. And that's compared to 88% that we had a few years ago in 2023. So we can see that things are starting to change a little bit in Trussville. And there's some reasons for that. But historically, most of our students are college bound, and typically we always have really engaged parents and guardians. So honestly, getting our parents to understand the FAFSA is a graduation requirement. Once they start talking to college recruiters and looking at college and university websites, they understand that this is a task that we can't overlook. May, if you want to move forward with, thank you. I will say we have noticed a pretty significant uptick or demand for our career academies in the last several years, specifically a couple of our new ones, those that train students in the trades. We have 10 career academy options for students, and over the last several years, the enrollment in our electrical construction, modern manufacturing, and our trades programs that are taught at the Academy of Craft Training have really increased. So there's again, a few different reasons for this interest, but we have noticed that it's affecting our FAFSA completion. More students are requesting to complete our non-participation waiver at the end of the school year. Again, we don't talk about the non-participation waiver until we have to, but they're citing the fact that they're planning on going directly into the workforce as a reason for completing the waiver. So also we've noticed more interest in the military as a career option for students. Just yesterday, I administered the ASFAB to 10th, 11th, and 12th grade students. The request to take the ASFAB this year at this time compared to last year at the same time is almost doubled. So going into the military right after high school has been another reason that students and parents have given us as to why they would like to complete a waiver rather than the FAFSA. But back to our college-bound students, we have a few strategies for motivating our Huskies to get started. May, if you want to go to my last slide. I've been a career coach at Hewitt since September of 2022. And for me to do my job, it's really important for me to understand who our students are. I've needed to know all of the information that I've shared with you on the previous slides so that I know what to focus on and how to spend my time. I've spent a lot of time learning about the best methods to communicate with students and parents in the community, because every community is really different and communities do change over time. I've learned that students think that the FAFSA is a task that their parents have to complete. They want and it's mostly because of the information that's required for the FAFSA. So for this task, I do really target the parents more than anyone else. So to best communicate with them, I've found that our Blackboard email system has been the best way to reach them. And at first, I send out monthly emails regarding the benefits of completing the FAFSA, and then the emails become more frequent. My messages include offers to help parents get this done. I offer appointments to meet face-to-face, but I also enlist the help of our experts like Alabama Possible. And I share many of the videos, articles, and presentations that Alabama Possible has shared with us. And our parents are really super grateful for these resources. I believe it's because they're easy to understand and really efficient. So we also share some of these resources in our monthly newsletters to parents. So parents are often seeing all these resources in multiple different places. Also in the spring, I plan afternoon visits with our financial aid representatives with our community colleges to answer parent questions. Regardless of where the students are going to college, students and parents can come and go during those afternoon sessions to get help with the FAFSA. Last year, we held a FAFSA night. We had a great turnout. It was standing room only. Based on last year's attendance, I know that we'll need to schedule a bigger room or maybe even our lecture hall to accommodate the demand for that help. Every time I send emails home, I notice an increase in the number of completed applications in the days that follow when I check And when I check the 8 completion portal. And we also see a bump in parent emails to myself and to our senior counselor with FAFSA questions. Trustful parents are really great about checking emails and responding. And I know this isn't the case everywhere in every community. So I am truly grateful to be working at Hewitt. And speaking of the completion portal, I do often, starting in January, I will check the 8 completion portal every single day so I can monitor how much work we have left to do. And usually in the week right after spring break, it's necessary for me to have individual contact with students to find out why they haven't completed the FAFSA yet. And for the most part, these are the students who are saying that they're going to go directly into the workforce or into the military, and they just haven't taken care of the waiver yet. there are also students who accidentally complete the FAFSA for the wrong school year. That's happened, over the last few years. But as far as tangible incentives are concerned, one of the things we do, we'll have a random drawing about once a month, beginning in January. Students who have completed the FAFSA, and this is according to the AIC portal, are automatically entered into a drawing to win a gift card to a student's favorite place to eat in Trustful. We'll make a big deal of it in the morning announcements. We'll post the winners in Schoology. We also have a class of the senior class page in Schoology that we post to and make announcements on and share resources through. This just encourages seniors to talk to their parents about the FAFSA. They talk to the parents about getting it done so they can be eligible for next month's drawing. And really, that's about it. For us, it's all about communication. And we're really intentional about talking about the FAFSA as often as possible, and making sure that everyone is aware of all of the resources that but when I say we, I mean us, community colleges, Alabama Possible, that we all have to share. So thank you so much for allowing me to speak today and to share what Hewitt's done in the past. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. I think y'all both really highlighted the importance of communication, but in addition to that, what really stuck out to me as I was talking with y'all this summer about all the things y'all do, y'all both have these like what I consider landing pages or like resource hubs that are always up and available for families to look through all the links and other resources they might need. So it's not just that they're getting an email that they might lose in their massive inbox, but they're also being able to like revisit Schoology to see everything posted or revisit your newsletter that has all the things like right at their fingertips. So thank you again for all the work that y'all are doing. It's definitely inspiring to see. And also, just glad to hear that it's been a fairly smooth process this year. I hope everyone is feeling that as well. Again, we'll have time for questions. Feel free to drop those in the chat. Some other resources that we have are our educator toolkit. So we have our Cash for College folder that has all things FAFSA in there. We also have linked our in-can training toolkit that we utilize pretty regularly. It has one of the PDFs that shows every single page of the FAFSA form. So if you want to feel more comfortable in navigating the form and you want a preview of every possible page a family could see, that's in Can's training toolkit too. Um, Not sure how many of y'all have already utilized the Federal Student Aid Hotline, but we kind of consider it your last resort if you're having an issue. So hopefully you call us first. But if necessary, you might have to utilize FSA's hotline. I'm just gonna get you our number real quick. So y'all can text or call us at our help desk at 334-316-6155. That's Monday through Friday during business hours. Sometimes, if we're not able to address the issue, I'll get on a three-way call with the family and federal student aid just to kind of serve as like a translator for all the FAFSA jargon that gets thrown around, and kind of point families in the right direction. So feel free to use that. Share those numbers with your families. If you're looking through our toolkit and it's just like a lot of documents and you're overwhelmed by it, we have these really short snippet videos, our toolkit takeaways, that highlight some of the key resources. So they're about 5 minutes long and they're on our YouTube channel. And then I wanted to go ahead and plug the webinars that I had mentioned previously. So in December, our last Alabama Goes to College webinar of the calendar year, we're going to have our Navigating Financial Aid for Immigrant Families. So we touched on some of the content today, but this will go into depth, even more depth about scenarios you might encounter. So I'm dropping a few links in the chat for y'all. We're also going to have our first community conversation pretty soon. So we'll send that out in our newsletter so you can register for that. But if you haven't had a chance to participate in any of our community conversations, they're a little bit different from our professional development webinars, so these are more presentation style trying to go deep into a topic for learning purposes, but our community conversations are more of just a chance to gather educators together to talk through things in a more informal, casual setting. It's not recorded, so hopefully feel free to speak candidly, but we're going to get those kicked off in the next month or so, and then we'll have, I think, 6 or 7 of those throughout the rest of the academic year. So I don't think I saw any questions in the chat, just revisiting. Oh, Dr. Hall, I'm looking at your question about our specific scenario we had for Tobin. Does dad have a recourse for taxes for his contribution? And I'm not quite sure what you're asking there in terms of recourse. So if you want to elaborate in the chat, feel free, and I can also pull that slide back up if we do want to revisit it. Dr. Hall, I'm just reading up your follow-up explanation. When you say the parent who contributed to the student's college fund also had to report if they were contributors, I'm not quite following that. Had to report where if they were contributors. Just to recap what the FAFSA is interested in, if parents are divorced or separated, the FAFSA is asking which parent provided more financial support. In Tobin's scenario, the mom was providing more financial support. So the FAFSA doesn't care about dad at all. Dad is out of the picture for FAFSA purposes. The FAFSA only wants the mom to either create an account or utilize the existing account that mom might have and then report mom's information. Dad doesn't secure a proof of contribution at all because dad does not provide majority of financial support. Does that make sense? For the purposes of the FAFSA, yeah, for the purposes of the FAFSA, dad is not a FAFSA parent. All right, closing out this poll. Well, just to explain the reasoning behind that, the FAFSA wants to know the parent providing the majority of the financial support because in the FAFSA's mind, this is the parent who's most associated with like the student's financial health and capacity. So, I mean, it kind of does make sense. You're linking the student to the parent who is involved financially with the student. So, for divorced and separated parents, it's the parent who is most involved with the student's finances. Perfect. Again, our help desk as a resource. We appreciate y'all for being here today. So no, if it is a 50-50 split. So if parents are contributing equally, it's a totally different question. If parents are contributing equally, then the FAFSA asks which parent has the greater income and assets. So it's a different question. And then if they're contributing to financially to the student equally, you're going to report the parent with the greater income or assets. So that does look different from the scenario that we went over for Tobin. Yeah. Okay, perfect. Awesome. Yeah, that's why I just think that parent wizard tool is so vital because the parent wizard tool does explain what to do if parents are contributing equally. So in that case, you're not like necessarily just ruling a parent out, you're asking even further questions. Um, so thank y'all for hanging on for a long one today, and thank you so much to all of our presenters for sharing their strategies. We look forward to learning even more from y'all throughout the year. Hope y'all have a wonderful week as we head into a holiday season, get some rest and gear up for a busy spring. But we look forward to seeing y'all in December and hope you have a great rest of your day.